Okay, now we will continue with the second topic for today. We have still on digitalization, a new reality for 2021 architecture. We will be having our second speaker. Our second speaker is a principal of Aedas with over 25 years experience and projects in such diverse locations as Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Africa, South America, Middle East, Asia, and Oceania, Australia. He is passionate about architecture. Our speaker is experienced in all project stages of infrastructure, hospitality, commercial, institutional, and residential works. His diverse experience enables his engagement in projects of wide-ranging scope. Our speaker is heavily involved in the AEC sector digitalization promotion, having led the Aedas Singapore in-house training program and BIM committee, the Aedas team to achieve the first runner-up in the BCA International BIM competition, and to win the worldwide Graphisoft design competition, Algorithmic Design Meets BIM. He is often invited as a speaker in talks in Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and today we are very fortunate to have with us here in our UAP PDC webinar, no other than architect Frederico Pedro Ramos.
Hi, good afternoon to all. Can I just check that you can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, first of all, a little bit of an introduction video from Aedas. Good afternoon to all. I would like to this opportunity to thank the United Architects of the Philippines and also the Professional Development Committee to allow me to invite me and allow me the honor to actually be in the afternoon with all of you today. So I will share my screen. And can you please confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, sir.
We can see it.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so as I was saying, thank you very much to all, and also to almost over 414 participants that I can see. So it's very good to be here. It's an honor to be with all of you. And I would like to once again thank you to the UAP and the PDC, as well as my fellow speaker Jojo Tarantino. It's been a couple of years that our names are being around. For those of us being in the industry, you are, of course, our names came across, and we never had the opportunity to actually meet. So we are doing this digital transformation and meet in this event. And through the next hour, I will try to talk a little bit about what is this new reality or that being introduced by the digitalization, and a little bit about BIM. I will talk some basic concepts and definitions of what BIM is about. The question, should we be asking us to BIM or not to be to BIM? Talking a little bit about BIM and design process, and also how BIM is impacting the construction process, and how I believe that we are now on the verge of a new paradigm that actually is completely radically changing the way that we work. Aedas as a company is built in this belief that the great designs can only exist if you truly understand deeply what is the social and cultural background of the community that you're designing for. And this is a driving force that kind of drive everything that we do. So as you might have saw on our video, we are located in 12 cities. We do architectural, interiors, master planning, retail, graphical design, landscape, mixed use, hospitality, infrastructure, retail, residential, education, adaptive reuse, cultural design, industry and logistics. And there's a little bit of an update from what we had on the video. So we have 590 international design awards from 2014 to 2019. And as the committee reminded me very well, is we as an architects, we like to see projects and pretty images. So I was asked to kind of join a little bit and talk a little bit of some of the projects that we do. Of course, the West Kowloon projects, there's the high-speed rail terminus in Hong Kong is one of our big iconic designs. In the same way that in Singapore, we have the Marina Bay Sands or the Star Vista, that is a 5,000 seating theater that is placed above a natural ventilated shopping mall, or the Sand Crawler that is actually the Lucas building, where some of the, we could see in some of this, when passing by the street, we could see in some of these windows some of the models of the films that they were using for the Star Wars movies later on. So they were being developed here. But it's also about conservation. And when we are in a rapid development environment, such in Southeast Asia, like in Singapore, we always need to look also at the value of our built heritage. And this is a work that we are very proud of it. That is the renovation of the Raffles Hotel in Singapore, one of the most iconic hotels in Singapore. And as based as an office based in Singapore, and that I'm part of it. We operate in all the Southeast Asia, and we reach as far as projects that we have Japan, Philippines, Australia, and the Middle East towards the West, passing by India, of course. And of course, we do have some projects in Philippines. There's some of the work that we have done there, the Asiana Plaza, the W Group Tower, or the Parkwall mixed-use development, the One Ayala Avenue, and a little bit about myself. So I have done several talks, Budapest, Tokyo, Osaka, several in Singapore, several in Europe also, again in Singapore, and I have some awards in terms, as was mentioned very politely when my introduction. But not only I talk often about digitalization, I also do some talks in healthcare, and now we actually combine digitalization and healthcare to develop new solutions that are designed and adapted to the needs of the communities that we're designing for. So when starting to reflect about how can we, in 1 hour that I was asked to talk, 1 hour, how can I talk about this idea of what is BIM and bringing this idea to BIM, of what is BIM to you all. I would like to try something. Before we start, can I ask the participants to use the chat and just respond yes if you consider BIM experts. Okay, so we can see that we have 3, 4, 5, the number is going up, 7. Okay, it's a good number, so it's good. It means that a lot of you already consider yourselves to be BIM experts. So this means that in terms of our development and our talk, we can actually keep it on a high level. And so I will then continue to my first. When talk about BIM, a lot of people ask, what is BIM? And even recently, I did a post on LinkedIn that generated a lot of discussion about what is BIM. And it's interesting to see that we don't even agree sometimes what is the definition of BIM. For some of us, we'll say, well, BIM is BIM information modeling. Some say BIM is BIM information model. And some of us actually talk about virtual design and construction. Some of us talk about integrated project delivery. But in reality, BIM is defined by one ISO norm. And ISO 29481 defines BIM as BIM information model. So BIM stands for BIM information model and is a shared digital representation of the physical and functional characteristics of any built object, including bridge, roads, and buildings, and which forms a reliable basis for decisions. And I particularly like this idea of, we don't build these models just to do models. We do them to inform our decisions. When we look at BIM as a process, and we move from the idea of the BIM information model to the BIM information modeling, of that I personally like to call virtual design and construction, we then embrace in a much more wider discussion that is related to the use of these softwares to virtually build a building before you actually go into place, but it can also allow us to analyze and to make decisions even later on during the life cycle of the built asset. So what are the benefits of BIM, you might ask? Okay, On the right side, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but BIM could be a cost saver, and a lot of people talk about this idea. This is the McLean curve that it's very well documented and very well referenced for all the authors, and talks about this idea of actually, in a process with BIM, you move your big decisions and big effort from the part of the documentation to the part of the design. So you are front ending a lot of these decisions at the moment where they cost less also during your construction process. As Jojo was saying, in their survey, they found that some of the projects could have 15% of work, abortive works related costs, and BIM can definitely work assist on a lot of this. It's an interesting, I personally think it's an interesting topic to actually consider this idea of the cost aspects and benefits of BIM, because the way that the industry has been approaching this is that a lot of times we just assume, okay, if BIM is faster, I can finish design faster, and I just move quicker to other aspects of it. I personally believe that that's not entirely necessarily true, and there are actually benefits from using BIM that are related to speed and efficiency and accuracy, of course, integrated and overlapping roles, full collaborative environment, reduced errors and omissions, reduce cost, reduce litigation, but above all, we achieve better quality results. And to achieve better quality results and focus again in quality and not so much on time, sometimes it's important also to understand and to be able to communicate with our clients that the fact that we are going to use BIM doesn't necessarily result in a translation of reduction of the design time. Sometimes actually you can even increase your design time. But as you increase your design time, you are improving the quality and you are reducing your construction time to be more effective and to actually reduce your construction cost. And when compared your design costs with your construction costs, the difference is stunning, and much bigger amounts of money are spent on your construction than on your design. So anything that you can actually do on the design side to reduce the costs from the construction is, of course, very beneficial for your clients at the end of the day. At the worldwide level, it is acceptable that the BIM-based design validation process can prevent 4.3 to 15.2 of the construction waste. So there is also a potential positive impact into the environment that arises from the reducing the construction waste by using of BIM. And at national levels, you can increase the productivity up to 28%. That is, of course, extremely positive, and reduce rework from 50 to 90%, depending on the type of works that you are doing. So this goes even higher than the findings that were reported by Jojo, but it's some of the data that the industry and the studies are showing it. And it's interesting also that at the developers level, you can actually, this is a study developed in Hong Kong, that the BIM processes can reduce the GFA cost per square meter in the order of the 8.6%. Interestingly enough, the same study that was done in Hong Kong showed that there was a little bit of a design cost increase on the design when you look at it exclusively, but if you combine design plus construction, then there is definitely a reduction on the overall combined. And one of the things that is interesting is also that if the architects on the designers, this is not only architects, but also engineers, by using BIM, are reducing and de-risking construction, should we be looking at it also trying to understanding that we might need some adjustment on the structure of how you understand fees. And this is one of the things that Jojo was also talking about, that we need to understand that the service that we are providing are going to change, and how can we better serve our clients and adjust to serve our clients. Okay, so one of the other aspects that for those of you that are already experts and for those of you that are now just being introduced to BIM, you will probably have heard about this idea of the BIM dimensions. And what is this idea of BIM dimensions? So for us architects, the 3D dimension is relatively easy. So we know that 3D is 3D geometry, and BIM 3D is basically we migrate from doing work in 2D, either by CAD or by drafting by hand. For those of you that are old enough, like me, white hairs, to actually have tried the rotting process of designing by hand, to construct and design our buildings in 3D. But there's more also beyond that. There is this idea of 4D that signifies adding time to the model and using the model to see how the construction evolves through time, and also cost. And then there's 6D sustainability, 7D facility management, and 8D that is related to safety. Although this is not entirely true, or you find it that several authors will call it differently. It's very pretty well established when you go up to the 6D. After the 6D starts to be a little bit more messy. And there are even authors that talks about this 10D that you can see here, 10 dimensions of BIM. But for the purpose of this, we will focus on these 3, 4D, 5D that are very acceptable, the 6D is sustainability, facility management, and BIM for safety. BIM maturity level is another aspect that is used to understand the level of comprehension and maturity of your BIM process. Traditionally or historically, we had the so-called BIM levels that were developed by the UK, the British standards 1192 and the PAS 1192. For those of you that work in BIM, you probably have heard about this. It's very commonly used. Although I must say also that in our region, the Southeast Asia, not always all the projects are referred to the PAS 1192. A lot of times we use also either Singapore standards or American standards also. This talks about the levels of BIM where we have the CAD as the level 0, so we are not using BIM at all. Level 1, we are using a mix between 2D and 3D. So still using some CAD, still using some, or trying to introduce some 3D elements, but keeping it as a little bit of a, not yet full coordinated among all the teams. And then you go to level 2 BIM, that is, this is what the UK government had established to be achieved by 2016, that they couldn't achieve that target, so they postponed it to 2021, if I'm not wrong. But there's this idea that you work collaboratively, so you actually are sharing information with others. So this idea of models and objects collaboration. Level 3D is a little bit like the next stage of BIM, and this is this idea that we will always, all of us will be collaborating online using a single model and building in a single model. So it's no longer my model, your model that we from time to time share in a cloud. We are just using it in a single model. To be totally honest, it's not yet there, and there's really not yet even a standard that will establish what are the requirements for that level. Since 2018, we have what we call the stages of maturity of BIM. This was introduced by BIM, by the ISO 19650, that is the international standard for BIM management and to all this process of information management using BIM. It's interesting if you see this area, and let me just try to point for it. Okay. So if you see all this area here, the information layer is actually pretty much what was introduced by the BIM levels. But ISO introduced even more layers to consider these stages of BIM. We start to talk about the business layer, the technology layer, and the standards layer. So of course, the ISO will enter on the standards layer, and information, how we share information is the information layer that was already established by PAS 1192. But now we need to look at business and technology. And this is actually, as Jojo said, it's when we talk about digitalization, it's not only one thing, it's actually looking about all the components of your business. One other concept that I want to talk about is this idea of BIM for FM, facility management. And many of us now in the industry say that this is the latest trend. I personally believe it's not so much the latest trend. It has been around for some years, but there's this idea that we have cloud integration on real-time data from Internet of Things sensors, and that you can integrate all this data in a common data environment to actually inform the decisions and to monitor and improve the operation of your buildings. Imagine you can use your energy management system from the building, compare it with your information BIM model that you have, and then identify potential areas where the building is not performing as it should be expected, or to really actually establish effective preventive maintenance schedules, because you can see, okay, let's say my pump is losing some performance, probably compared to the building information model that I have related to its operation time, is already getting to the end of this life cycle. So I can do a maintenance replacement now to increase the efficiency of the building, instead of waiting it that it can be that it actually breaks to repair it, and then it has huge impacts in terms of the operation itself. So why do I think that this idea of the BIM for FM is not the latest trend at all? And this was touched also by Jojo in his presentation. Yes, we started to use BIM for designing, we use it BIM for construction, we introduced BIM for facility management, but there is more than that. And the idea of using BIM for refurbishment, or even for a controlled demolition or decommission of a building, and then collecting all that data for future developments, pre-design stages, leading to this idea of the full cycle BIM. That is an idea that we first used in 2013 in a BCA BIM competition. So we are over 7 years ago, and the UK Soft Landings Initiative also talks about this idea of actually monitoring the life cycle, or monitoring the designs through the implementation to the live operation of the building. So it's not so much a new thing, although it is an important thing, and it's coming you're coming across much more in terms of RFPs to request you to actually respond to this need of the BIM for facility management. I personally think that you can always benefit the client if you actually look from the whole life cycle and not only for facility management. The digital twin workflow is another idea that is very commonly heard about. So what is this idea of the digital twin? So imagine that you have built your BIM model, so that is an exact replica of what you have as a built asset. So your building is replicated in a digital realm. You can use it as a productive twin. So this idea of productive twin is where you actually have two disconnected environments. So your digital model and your live model not necessarily linked, but you can still use your digital twin to produce and simulate the operation of the building. As we move to the level of digital twin, you start to use the idea of Internet of Things sensors that link data to automate the collection of data directly from your built asset into your digital model twin, that allowing you to compare without the needing of manually feed into your uh, digital twin model. Augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality. Jojo showed us some of the interesting ideas that you are experimenting in your with this. There are three levels. It's important to understand that the virtual reality is the one that we are more familiar with it, and it comprehends a truly um, immersive experience where you basically have no contact with reality. We are just completely in the digital environment. When you go for the augmented reality, it's slightly different. And this starts, it's where you are augmented reality by using digital elements to further expand it, okay? And then there is one that mixes both of them, and it's quite interesting actually, because you can at the same time be, as in this image here, you are using things like Microsoft HoloLens 2 that allows you to see the digital world that you are constructing, but still look and see through to your augmented reality world that you have on top of the table. So you will be able actually to meet persons that are on the other side of the table, and on top of the table you can have an holographic experience that you are using to actually get into it. So it's an interesting mixing of both of the technologies. So to BIM or not to BIM, I believe that that's no longer the question. In the way that we are, and as the industry has evolved, there is no future without BIM. And some of you might think that BIM is a new thing. I do have some bad news for you. BIM is not new. BIM has been around for 30 years or more. And if anything, BIM is the present, but BIM is becoming very quickly the past. If you just look at BIM, conventional BIM as it is, you no longer will be competitive in the next 5 to 10 years if that's your goal. Because as previously said, when you're looking at about BIM, it goes much further beyond just building models. It's about the optimization of your processes. It's about leveraging for construction. And all of that goes beyond the conventional 3D BIM, even if you look at it at BIM introducing also data. Okay, so one of the common discussions that I often see about this BIM is, but when do we start to use BIM? And a lot of us on the beginning have adopted a quite interesting strategy that is, we do design, and then almost like in a similar way that we used to do when we were doing 3D visualization, we pass the completed design to another department, and another department will develop the BIM model. It's not even a BIM process, it's the BIM model. And in recent years, we have been seen a very positive understanding from the industry that this is not hard cut. Design and BIM are just two faces of the same coin, and they need to be completely integrated to actually be able to leverage all the advantage of the BIM as a process. But in reality, this seamless integration is not even a fade in, fade out. We are moving to something that I like to call like a constellation of data. Focus on data. We will evolve data through the process and through all the stages of the process, augmented data, and you will touching this data with whatever tool that you have at hand that is more convenient and more expedite and more efficient to complete your task. It could be an Excel spreadsheet that you're actually using to change your data. It could be a BIM model. It could be a BIM cloud point cloud that you actually have extracted from your surveyor. All of these are elements that are augmenting your digital data for your building. So that's why when you're doing BIM, data preservation became such an important aspect of it. So data preservation focus on common data environment. This name, do focus this about it because it's extremely important to all the future of BIM. When you look at the traditional process, even when we do BIM, you do planning, and then there's some loss that is of information when you go from planning to design. There is some loss of information when you pass from design to construction, and there is also some loss of information when you go from construction to operations. Ideally, you want to continue collecting information without any loss. And this is the beauty of using BIM in a common data environment as a single source of truth. So when you integrate BIM in a common data environment that preserves your data, so every participant is actually adding to the same common pool of data, you will ensure that you avoid this waste that you can see here on this diagram. To achieve this, you need to be extremely good in terms of data interoperability. And this is one of the challenges of our industry. How do we achieve this data interoperability? Of course, through Open BIM, through BIM data management, and through allowing us all to use international standards that preserves that BIM. As the BIM data management became so important, is it going to be the case that in the future, BIM managers will become the new PMs, or the PMs and the BIM PM and the BIM management will merge as a single entity? It's actually a very interesting question to look when we think about this, because from the model, from using your BIM process or visual design and construction, you can actually monitor live the process of the design, and you can quantify it, and you can actually keep in mind automation of how many issues do we still have open, how many issues are able to close by each week. So you monitor the progress. You monitor the construction process also. You can check what has been achieved on site using robotics and sensors to against what you have in your model, using 4D BIM and the construction process virtually to see if you are behind the construction, the timeline, or in line with your timeline. And you can do using BIM data performance analytics, you can actually augment the information that you have to take this decision. So that's why a lot of authors are starting to say, well, maybe in the future we will see BIM management and project management congregating as a single action. So as I mentioned before, standards robustness, is going to be fundamental to ensure that we as an industry could collaborate seamlessly and preserve our data. Sometimes people talk, but why is this important? Why so important to maintain data? So imagine that you have all your formats, let's say in DWG, when you're using 2D CAD. If suddenly DWG disappear from the industry, all the information that was being stored in DWG will not be able to be read by any computer anymore. International standards allows you to ensure that your data will be preserved even if one of the industry players disappears or one format disappears. There are ways to actually continue to ensure that your data is preserved. And that's achieved by the Building Smart Industry Foundation classes format, the IFC format, that is introduced by the ISO 16739. Also, a very common standard that you'll hear about when you talk about facility measurements is this idea of COBE. So the Construction Operations Building Information Exchange is a format that you use to collect data related to buildings operation. Simulation, safety, and automation are the next levels of BIM. As I was saying, if you just look at BIM from the conventional way of doing it, you probably are going to be out of business in the next, or you risk being out of business in the next 10 years because the industry is moving way beyond that. So we are using BIM. 4D BIM is actually allowing you to simulate the construction in the virtual environment, so you can actually study sequences of construction. What are the challenges that you have to install elements ones after the other? How do you place your cranes? How do you manage your access to your site? This reduces reduces risk, reduces mistakes, and optimizes your site, your building when it goes into construction site. And of course, the idea of safe construction sites. Unfortunately and traditionally, the construction industry in the past, it was very associated with having accidents to work that sometimes even cost life to person. By using BIM, you can really mitigate and reduce the risk of these accidents happen. Assets operation. And this goes beyond just the BIM for facility management that we talked before, that is there, is the combination of this BIM facility management, these digital twins that will take us in the future to this idea of the technological building. The technological building, and this is an image of a control center in a US hospital. You actually are monitoring your building's operation, almost like if you were in an airport traffic control. And you can check movement, check traffic, you can check all the operations, and you, on real lifetime, you can make decisions to adjust the performance of your building. This is extremely important for owners because to keep it in perspective, your CapEx cost, so your initial investment that is related to design and construction of a project, is probably only 30% of your total life cost operation. So when you focus on these 30% and you tend to forget the other 70%, your costs through all the life cycle are going to be exponential. And that's why being able to real-time optimize your building performance using BIM for FM based on digital twins and with this the new idea of technological buildings is going to be more and more demanded by all the building owners, especially the ones that actually keep their assets. So things like hospitals, airports, retails, not so much on residential because a lot of times, sometimes they are sold to other owners. So that you don't, the building contractor will not keep its ownership, but when you keep your ownership, this becomes extremely important. And this final idea of integrating BIM, virtual design, construction and operation, and smart cities. So leveraging on the twins workflow, you can actually integrate this data, and people are already starting to do this with the smart cities that we have been talking about. And we see a lot in the industry, the beginning of this idea of city information model as a further development from the building information model. Okay, so this brings us to, and our in time not so bad, so roughly mid of my presentation, and we're talking about the BIM impact into the design processes. We all know that we love to draw, and architects are, and all the designers have this tradition of understanding the exercise of architecture a lot based on drafting. The reality is that with the implementation of BIM, you are no longer drafting, you model buildings. So you move from drafting to modeling. And this is a fundamental change to the way that we do things. We also go from the traditional offline design coordination to a full integrated virtual building in a virtual environment, collaborative environment. These two changes are radically impacting the way that we do design, to a point that we are now adopting and seeing much more and more and more of this idea of data-driven design. Data-driven design can leverage on big data because for the first time we have the potential, even at the AEC industry, to leverage all the data that is available. While in the past we will be able to read one book or read two books, these days you can actually have, through internet, access to huge amount of data. We can have much better informed decisions about how we can design. Performance-based design, this idea where you can actually simulate and use automation to design. On the right corner, you have an image that is from Solibri, and this is interesting. It's exactly what was being talked by Joe Joiny's presentation. You can build in rules checkers into your process so that when you model it, you already know if you're complying or not with your statutory obligations. One interesting idea that I would like to define here is this idea of parametric versus logarithmic versus generative design. So let us explain this in using this diagram. So you can have a manual loop process where basically you develop, you evaluate, and then you learn from what you have developed and manually feed back to your to go back and try again. So it's the try and error, but using computational design to do it. Or you can have an open loop prototype where you develop and evaluate, and this is automatically, but you still have a feedback that is manual, so you still control that. Or you can even have a closed loop prototyping where all the process is automated and you define the process, but you let it evolve by itself. This is a little bit of the generative design itself. Okay, so where traditionally, and this is our colleague Louis Sullivan, he said that the form follows function. What we have been seeing, what we are seeing now is that with the evolution of BIM and the evolution of design, form starts to follow performance. So when form follows performance, you actually have two ways of doing. You either adopt a what if design strategy, and this is the parametrical design. So if I make this change, what happens? Or you can have a if what design strategy. And the if what design strategy is actually the optioning, design optioneering, and this is more the generative design where we actually say, okay, what do I require to do to obtain search performance from my design? This image, I really like it very much. It's an image from General Motors. And I think there is a lot of what we in the architectural industry can also learn from the auto industry on the optimization and the process of manufacturing optimization. This is an image of a bracket for a seating of a track. And what they were able to do using generative design was create a bracket that was 20% lighter and 40% harder, more resistant, than using 50% less material. So imagine if we could actually achieve the same level of increasement of performance in architecture by using our generative design tools. To give you an idea, of course, you're going to say, but when we do this generative data, Fred, how does this work actually? And whatever you design and whatever data you put in is only as good as whatever your results are only as good as your data that you put in. And computers are not biased. But if you tell them to do something, they will do regardless of seeing if it is possible or not. And this is an example from Dieter Heinrich that I particularly love about to make us understand how we need to understand where data can fail us. If you just process, and because it's digital data, you can do everything you want. You can twist a building, you can put it upside down, turn it on upside down, in and out. It doesn't really matter. It can be whatever. You can even float, because in the digital world, there is no limitations for it, for your what you can do with data, because it's just data at the end of the world, of the day. So if it is just data, you can even disassembly all the data. This is where the human intervention and knowledge will guide the use of data. And now, I move now for this idea of BIM and construction, and how BIM is actually used even in the conventional on-site construction that we have today. BIM can also be used to generate this idea of design for manufacturing and assembly. It's another idea that you probably will hear a lot. And it is this idea that when you design, you use the digital data on your model to automatically allow you to manufacture and assembly, not necessarily needing to go for construction. BIM to field is an idea or a concept that links the digital realm of BIM with the conventional construction sites. This is about taking BIM to the field, and you can use it for 3D mapping and construction verification. Is the example that you have on top of it, where a robot scanner, robot like this one here, actually allows you to an early identification that you have an error of the assembly of an element that could prevent, let's say, this was an element on the false ceiling related to the MEP, that you will then continue to build all your MLP out of tolerance, and you will find out probably weeks later when you were installing the ceiling that was on the wrong height and you needed to demolish everything to correct the height. With the digital real 3D mapping, you can avoid these situations. There are other images also, like using our robotics for construction, either more human related robotics or more conventional robotics for construction. But there is also this idea of going offsite. And we are all common with this offsite prefabrication. Prefabrication can save us 45% on time of construction, can increase 15% of the quality, and it can also reduce your construction cost to up to 30%. Even moving a little bit more, there is this idea of the prefabricated, pre-finished volumetric construction that basically transforms construction into assembly using the design for manufacturing and assembly, allowing you to reduce up to 60% of the time that you spend on site, and to improve your quality and rigor of construction by up to 50% compared to a conventional system. The latest technology that we have been seeing a lot in terms of 3D printing, in terms of construction, is actually this idea of going to 3D printing. This image that you have on top is actually one image during the construction of what is today the largest building printed in the world, in Dubai. And it's interesting because Dubai is actually targeting to achieve that by 2030. 25% of their buildings, new buildings, will be 3D printed. So they have been driving this idea of 3D printing buildings. With 3D printing buildings, we aim to achieve 50 to 70% of reduction on time and potential 50 to 80% reduction in costs related to labor, construction labor. So in conclusion, this is why, because of all of this, I believe that we might now be facing a new paradigm. So what if this combination of performance-based design, data-driven, as we mentioned before, with design for fabrication, with use and empowerment, is this actually leading us to a new paradigm? A new paradigm where we will be needing a new type of architects, where we will become a mix between a funky architect that we have always been with these geek coders. As Jojo was mentioning in his presentation, we will need to be able to code also, okay? It's going beyond much more than just the traditional tasks that we did as an architect. It's going to create a new process where instead of designing in the buildings in the way that you used to, we will use generative design to not design the building, but create the system that is going to design the building. We will still control the design, but we will be assisted by this new system in what I like to call a human-computer co-authorship. We will have new roles where we will need to adjust to new skills and knowledge to these new requirements. So we'll see, as I mentioned before, this idea, the BIM managers became the project manager of the future. Who knows? And in a new industry, so this industry 4.0 is radically changing the way that we actually see the AEC construction today. We'll be adopting mass production of limited series, leveraging the benefits of design for fabrication to create a truly environment-friendly fabrication and assembly solutions, transforming the industry from construction towards assembly. And in an industry that is going to be for the users and by the users. It's an interesting thing because we always think that BIM is always very complicated, but it doesn't necessarily needs to be. BIM is about being able to communicate in a much more efficient way and leveraging on social media and new communications tools, we can now interact with our end users in a much more direct way. And end users, because of the world and the time that we live, they want to be part of this discussion. So this idea of the architects and designers that will live on semi-isolation, developing their designs, and then later on, let's say 3 years after the design is built, someone can actually comment on the design, it's no longer reality. People want to be part of the designs itself. And one of the good examples that I have found is this UN Habitat, the UN Agency for Sustainable Habitats, is actually using Minecraft, that is a video game, to design public spaces in more than 25 emerging countries. By quickly teaching people such a user-friendly interface and easy to use as a Minecraft game, communities were able to virtual build their public spaces, informing an expression of what was the virtual desire or what they will like to see in their public spaces that allows then the technical and experts to use that to inform their designs to really respond to the needs of the user. I think this revolution is the idea that we can actually not try to second guess users, we can actually collaborate with users to get our designs to be most adapted to the communities that we live in, really creating this idea that the industry will be for the users and by the users. And with this, and with this idea that it's actually about a new future, I will finish my presentation with a video from our future projects, if you still have time to actually pass it.
Yes, sir. We still have time.
Thank you very much, Roger. Appreciate it. So Roger, do you want it to play it from my side, or you really play it from your side? How do you want to go about it?
You can play it, sir. If
Okay, thank you very much then, much appreciated that. Let me stop sharing. There you go.